I have always realized is that cybersecurity, we're not very good at it as an industry. There are more data breaches. The cost of data breaches are going up. The number of ransomware attacks is going up. The number of supply chain issues is increasing. The impact on the customers is increasing. Why did someone do something that we weren't expecting them to do? They obviously did it because of a reason. Unless there's malicious intent, the real reason why they do something wrong is because the system hasn't really allowed them to do it the right way in the first time. I've worked with so many clients where SAST drives a wedge between the security teams and the developers. The whole weakness of command and control is the idea is that there's one person sits at the top and has overarching control about everything we do. Doesn't make sense. How can that one person be right all the time? What's fundamentally broken is that we don't understand what security really is. And we're trying to persuade our developers and SOC analysts and all the different people that are involved in security to do better.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to CyberSyn Labs podcast, where we explore multidisciplinary insights that help improve the effectiveness of tech entrepreneurs, executives, and practitioners. Today's guest is Glenn Wilson, the founder and CTO of Dynaminet. He's also the author of the book, DevSecOps, a leader's guide to producing secure software without compromising flow, feedback, and continuous improvement. Glenn is a fellow cybersecurity practitioner that takes his theory seriously. His practice, his entire approach is rooted in systems thinking, cybernetics. And today's podcast is going to take a cybernetic lens about cybersecurity, and more specifically, a viable systems model, a VSM lens at organization, and explore how it impacts cybersecurity. Glenn actually has a paper on this very topic, and I can't wait to dive deep into it with Glenn himself. Glenn, welcome to the CyberSyn Labs podcast.
Hi, Lax. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me along.
Awesome. Great to have you. I originally got to know you through LinkedIn, and I've learned a lot from your posts and some of the podcasts you've done with John Willis as well. And it's great to see another cybersecurity practitioner and a consultant that has their work rooted in systems thinking, because it is so rare to find. And so I'm super glad to have stumbled upon your works and super glad to have you on the podcast. And so the first thing I want to dive into is learn more about your own professional journey and how it kind of weaves into systems thinking, complexity, and cybernetics.
Yeah, sure. So, it really is it's one of those journeys. I never planned it. It just happened. I started out a long time ago. I started out just studying languages, Italian and French. I did that at university. But when I left university, I ended up working mostly in market research. And from market research, long story short, there's a lot of data numbers crunching and so forth. So because of that, I had a greater interest in doing more software engineering to manipulate the data. It wasn't just numbers. It was like it was qualitative and quantitative data research, and I wanted to generate reports from that. So I started using some coding to do that. And anyway, that led me down into the world of software engineering. And I really enjoyed that at first. But what I really enjoyed most of all was becoming more of a management and leader in software development. And I ended up managing and leading teams that were developing software that had to be very secure. So these were chip and pin devices, and for one company, healthcare apps for another company. And that really got me into the whole idea of cybersecurity. I'd obviously touched cybersecurity in other areas. I'd worked in the finance industry before, the insurance industry before that, and I'd always had this understanding of cybersecurity. The other side of it, because as I just said, I started doing software quite late in my career. I never
Mm.
set out to be a software engineer at the outset. And so I was always looking for that leading skill that I could use, because I'm further behind. I need to find out where's the next paradigm shift moving to. And that's where I discovered Agile. And that was actually before the manifesto. So this is like 1998, 1999. It wasn't called Agile then. It was more about extreme programming. So that really interested me. The whole idea of not doing waterfall software development, but developing very quickly. Now, that sort of like planted the seeds in my head of systems thinking, systemic ways of building stuff. So. I'll come back onto that in a second. But basically, that gave me that's a feeling that there's a different way of doing stuff than just waterfall. And then I started doing a bit more security, and I did a bit more security, and I thought this is really good fun. I really enjoy doing this stuff. And so I wanted to sort of train for a SISP. I did a lot of work with other companies in security. I blended Agile and security to DevSecOps. I wrote the book on DevSecOps. What I was trying to do there is explain to readers, and particularly leaders, that there are different ways of doing software development than waterfall and still be secure. And that was what I was really trying to show there. Now, earlier in that journey, I discovered someone called W. Edwards Deming. And he had, so he came up with really two sets of, or two frameworks, I guess. The first one was his 14 points, which he wrote in 1983-84. And that was out of the crisis, in his book, Out of the Crisis. And then he wrote New Economics, about a decade later, when he was in his 90s. And in that, there are four items in his framework. Basically, the key one there for me was appreciation for a system. The others are knowledge of variation. The other one was psychology, and the last one was theory of knowledge. So there were four elements there. And I started thinking, what does he mean by appreciation of a system? He says not a system as in a system that's developed by software engineers. This is a system that is more wider than this. And what did he mean by that? Anyway, that took me down the path of Russell Ackoff and other system thinkers that were contemporary with Deming. And I thought, I really enjoy doing this. So I was trying to understand a bit more about what system thinking meant. And I was doing a lot of this research on my own. I read a lot. I read Donnie Allen Meadows, who told me it was the best thing to read. So I read that. John Wins, I think, also says that was a really good book to read as well. So, and I really appreciated that the whole idea of a system rather than a reductionist look at things that really interested me. And I started seeing a lot of value in what was being said by these people. Anyway, it took me a few years, and I wrote a book, and I thought, do you know what, I might study this properly. So I went down the route of doing a master's degree in systems thinking and practice through the Open University in the UK. And that was where I ended up writing my thesis. And then, of course, I wanted to write about cybersecurity. And I think the reason why I wanted to do that is because I'm not never going to talk about this, but one of the reasons why I wanted to write about cybersecurity and systems thinking is there isn't really anything out there about systems thinking and cybersecurity that is recognized, let's say. And even when I do my literature search for cybersecurity and systems thinking, I didn't come up with very much, to be honest. So it's not something that's done a lot. And I wanted to also, I know we're going to delve into my paper in a bit, but one thing that I have always realized is that cybersecurity, we're not very good at it as an industry. We struggle with it. You look at the reports that come out from IBM, from Mendiant and other people that publish reports, and Verizon, obviously the big one, another big one. But a lot of other academic researchers as well have looked into this, and they found that we are still getting worse with cybersecurity. There are more data breaches. The cost of data breaches are going up. The number of ransomware attacks is going up. The number of supply chain issues is increasing. The impact on the customers is increasing. We're not going the right way. And so I thought that was interesting. Why are we not going the right way? Why is it that it seems that the attackers are winning at the moment? And I just felt like perhaps there is a systems thinking way of doing it. And that was something I wanted to cover in my thesis in my master's.
Awesome.
So,
That's a long, winding journey, taking multiple side quests, reading other people's. So I'm kind of curious, like after learning all of these things and it's like developing a new set of eyes and you look at everything completely differently. And it's not just about work, because these ideas are so fundamental that they profoundly change you as a person, as a father, as a husband, what have you. And so I'm kind of curious about your worldview on fundamental human nature. As you said, psychology is one of the 4 things that Deming also was a proponent of. And so just going deep into that, and because that's also very relevant to cybersecurity professionals on how we make decisions and so on and so forth. So human psychology is a very important topic from that lens as well. And also what lens you use to view organizations themselves.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring in John Boyd here, and his OODA loop. I will say that over the lifetime of this journey that I've been on, my orientation is always adapted, is always changing, and so the worldview I have today is probably not the worldview I had a few years ago.
Of course,
I think what it's done is I quite often now think of the system at fault, not the person at fault. So why did someone do something that we weren't expect them to do? They obviously did it because of a reason. Unless there's malicious intent, the real reason why they do something wrong is because the system hasn't really allowed them to do it the right way in the first time, or the system has not enabled success. It's enabled failure rather than success.
So you may want to explain for the listeners what you mean by the system.
So because
there are so many definitions. So I much prefer, your description of what you mean by a system. Yeah.
Well, system is something that can be is something that's bounded by common properties. So, but I'd like to do it this way. I'd like to explain a school, for example. What is a school? It's a system that educates children, and that is a system. But within the school, there's another system. It's a system that employs teachers. That's another system. And then there's another one. It's a system that employs janitors to keep the school clean. So that's another system. So when I say a system is bounded, it's bounded by purpose. So that's what I call a system, from my perspective. So that is how I define a system in that sense. However, discovering the boundary of a system is quite difficult. We know that.
Yes. I'm a big fan of how Ashby defines a system, like a set of variables and the boundary of which is chosen by an observer. And so that immediately brings in the second order perspective there, because every observer is different. And so the janitor's purpose of the school versus students and teachers, they're all going to be very, very different.
I mean, that whole idea of, the observer is a very interesting area. I mean, it led to a lot of problems. If you think about the Macy conferences, there was a lot of arguments there about what the observer's role is within the system. Is an observer looking at the system from the outside in, or from the inside out? And if they're looking from the inside out, are they then part of the system? And therefore, are they observing themselves within the system? And are other people observing they're within the system? So Yeah, and the second order cybernetics can be quite deep. If
Yeah.
you go to that
Yeah.
route.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's my definition of a system. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we were talking about fundamental human nature and the lens you use to view
Yeah.
organizations. And so the first thing you said is, hey, if something goes wrong, don't blame the human. Look at the environmental factors that led to him or her make that decision at that point. It could be completely broken incentives or things like that. But yes, that point's well taken. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So incentives is a good one. Yeah. I mean, we all see this, the idea of the salesperson, they're incentivized to sell a product in order to perhaps get a bonus based on the sales. But really, should their incentive be to improve the organization and their relationship with the customer, and therefore develop longer term vision sales? So incentives is a big one there.
Let me actually double click and expand what you just said, that the salespeople incentive structure. And so one analogy or metaphor that I'd like to draw there is bees in a beehive. They actually go and explore, and once they find out a source of nectar or pollen, they actually come back and
Yeah.
For the lack of a better word, shout it from the rooftops to everybody else with the waggle dance. And the more bigger the source, the longer it's going to continue to do the waggle dance, which means more bees will look at it and go towards that location and source. And as it turns out, there is hormones that give it the endorphins or whatever, that there's a hormonal pleasure that the bee derives. It's kind of in a trance when it actually does the waggle dance. So nature rewards it only when it shares that information. But think about a salesperson who has figured out a way to sell a security product. Maybe he's found a unique new compliance, in a specific country or whatever. And, he wants to get as much bonus for next year rather than sharing it with everybody else. And so the incentive structure drives that person to keep it to himself or herself so that they can improve their bonus payout rather than sharing it with everybody else. And so you cannot blame that person for optimizing for that if the incentive structure is that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And just taking over further, taking that cybersecurity salesperson, they're not building relationships with their customers. How do they know what the problem is that they're trying to solve with their product? And I'm going to just take this example. Like SAST has been sold to the AppSec industry for a long time. SAST is software application security testing, and it's something that can scan code to identify potential weaknesses in the code from a security perspective. Now, one of the bigger challenges it has is it creates all the false positives. And the way I look at it is that all we've done is we've sold a product that's created more problems because it's generated millions and millions of false positives and no solution as to how to fix which ones are true positives and how do we actually, make ourselves more secure.
Yeah.
So, and this is where you go back to system thinking, are you a salesperson selling a SaaS product, or are you a salesperson selling a cybersecurity solution to improve the security of an organization? And the two don't marry, to be honest, in my view. I mean, I've worked with so many clients where SAST it's divisive. It drives a wedge between the security teams and the developers. The developers are saying, security teams are saying, you've got all these hundreds and hundreds of vulnerabilities, you need to fix them, or at least triage them to make sure that, and developers say, we haven't got time. We don't have the time to go through all these vulnerabilities. And anyway, most of these are false positives anyway. Why do we need to care? And so, we've been sold a product that generates vulnerabilities and false positives. We haven't been sold a solution that fixes a cybersecurity problem. And I think that's part of it, Like if you go to buy a drill, if you go to a shop to buy a drill, the person that's selling you the drill bit is not actually selling you a drill. He's selling you a hole, because that's what you want at the end of the day, is a hole. It's the same sort of thing. I don't want SAST per se. I want a product that's going to help me improve my security.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we struggle with incentivization and we have been for a long time led by these companies that are delivering SAST products. And I think it's because it was an easy win. We had regulators that come along and said you have to use some sort of vulnerability scanning tool. So it was an easy win for the vendors of SaaS tools to just sell it. I mean, that's my view. It might not be popular with some SaaS vendors, but
if you manage to sell it to a regulator or a standards body once, you've effectively sold it to so many other companies, and now that it's part of the compliance mandate, we know how the game goes there. Awesome. So, I'd like to kind of pull us back to your journey and some of the books you mentioned. Obviously, you mentioned Deming's books and Meadows. So talk about what are some of the books or papers or authors that really now underpin your worldview and your practice as a cybersecurity practitioner today. What are some of the top books that come to mind?
Yeah, so I've read widely since I've become a bit more of a systems thinking person. I had read so widely, so a lot of it has inspired me at the beginning as it blurred a bit. However, what I will say is that I've been drawn to certain individuals that wrote about cybernetics, and we mentioned Stafford earlier. Stafford, I was drawn to him, and I think the reason why I was drawn to Stafford is because I got it, I understood it. I know lots of people don't understand it, but for me it resonated. And what is also important for me is that he was actually a businessman first. He wasn't a systems thinker or a cybernetician first. You think about the likes of Wiener and Ashby and McCulloch and those sort of people past, they were cyberneticians, but Beer took it to a different audience with a viable systems model. So he was still drawing from the cyberneticians in the sense of, looking at the human body or the human way that we work. So how does the brain work, and how does it communicate with the rest of our system, with the rest of our body? How does that system work? And as a result of that, he was able to come up with his model, which he called the viable system model, which is based on principles of communication and feedback loops, which is sort of like where cyberneticians were going at that time. That obviously brought me along brought Ross Ashby into my thinking at the time as well. Ross Ashby I've got a lot of time for. I think he was amazing. And Wiener as well, Norbert Wiener. He was the person that sort of like brought the words cybernetics into the fray when he wrote his books. I really wrote a couple of books, but Cybernetics was his first book. It comes from the actual word, the Greek word Kubernetes, which is obviously the same word that we use for a platform technology. Yeah, Kubernetes. It's actually without the same etymology. And the word cyber is not really related to cybersecurity. It's really it is now, but it wasn't. I mean,
yes.
I'm guessing it was probably I don't know. It was probably I think it probably came from the word cyberspace. I think originally, and then cyberspace became anything that has to do with the computer, and so cyberspace then became cyber tech and cyber security and cyber whatever else. But anyway, these sort of people influence me in some of my thinking now. But Ross Ashby, Stafford Beer, they resonated with me because I could see the challenges that they were trying to solve. I will also throw in another person who isn't a cybernetician, and I have mentioned him previously in this chat, is John Boyd. Now, John Boyd is misunderstood big time. Everybody thinks of John Boyd as Mr. OODA loop, and we see this OODA loop where it's basically a 4-step of is observe, orientate, decide and act, and he's treated like this single flow. But actually what John Boyd is the sum of all his research. He wasn't just a fighter pilot. He did a lot of research. I know of people who've been to his archives in Quantico, Virginia, in North America, and they see all the annotations that he's made around books he's read. He's read Taichi Ono,
Mm-hmm.
who's very influential in the Toyota propulsion system.
Mm-hmm.
He read lots of people like that. I'm pretty sure he read Deming. I have looked through his archive papers so you can see the papers that he had read, and Deming does feature every now and again. So he was widely read. And so I like to think of Stafford, Ross Ashby, and John Boyd. That's sort of like a shaping the way that I'm thinking. The whole idea that we have this orientation about us, and that sort of like governs the way we are. And then you take governance and push that into the VSM, then you'll see how that's like how it works. So yeah, that's sort of like where I was coming from. And so
Awesome.
they're the biggest influences. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Ashby, Beer, and Boyd. I think that's enough to be red pilled, to develop a completely new worldview.
Oh yeah, they. I mean, that's just fascinating people, especially Boyd. As I say, he's misunderstood. I think Beer is misunderstood as well. I mean, what Beer did in Chile was remarkable. What he was trying to do, and he was having an impact until the sad coup that. So his sponsor was Allende, the president of Chile at the time, and unfortunately, Allende lost his life in a coup. Stafford Beer and many others had to run for their lives and escape Chile. But what he was trying to do there was trying to bring the viable system model to a national scale, which is remarkable. And I'd love to see how he would have succeeded in it, or how that would have gone if the coup hadn't happened. So it's fascinating.
Absolutely. I had Professor Mike C. Jackson on my podcast a couple months ago, and he gave it the perfect description in terms of on one end you have Soviet style central planning, and on the other end extreme you have freewheeling capitalism. And so what CyberSyn was really my company's named after Project Cybersyn. I'm such a big fan. Is the perfect kind of balance between those two, right? You can't go one way with this extreme or that extreme. Like, how do you find that balance? And I think that paradox or irony is well captured in the book, or the mini book, Designing Freedom. Right? Yes, there's a level of design involved, but essentially what you're trying to design is you're enabling more freedom and autonomy and agency for all of the citizens involved.
Yeah.
And so allowing for emergence and things like that. So I think Silicon Valley has gone the other extreme of too much central planning, top-down command and control, and so on and so forth. They have no clue. How do you, at least go to the center? You don't have to go to the other extreme where it's complete chaos, but how do you get there? I think that's the sweet spot that we're exploring here. So super excited to dive into the core topic on VSM.
Yeah, it's interesting. Command and control. It's a very human phenomena. I think it's and there's something about humans wanting to be in control. But what the cyberneticians really taught us is that there is no central control. What we are is adaptive to the environment around us, or we react to the environment around us. That's the control we have. So when Norbert Wiener did write about his cybernetics, it was communication and control in humans and animals, I think is the way he worded it. But it wasn't command and control, it was communication and control. Is how do we control our systems based on the communication between environment to system to system, and so forth. And that's what we seem to be missing today. Is that and the whole weakness of command and control is the idea is that there's one person sits at the top and has overarching control about everything we do. Doesn't make sense, How can that one person be right all the time? And I just think that's. That's misunderstood. And just going back to what you said about the Cybersyn experiment in Chile, is Stafford Beer as I was saying, it was also misunderstood, because I think people thought he was developing this this control room that was going to give out commands, but that wasn't what it was. It was more a case of like having this monitoring room. This monitoring room was to say, well, now, we don't have enough coal supply going to this area. We need to change that. And so how can we do that? And let the system work it out for itself, as opposed to saying, right, we need to send more coal this way. We do it this way, by doing this and this. We let the system work it out by itself. But telling you the feedback we give it is
coordination
and coordination and communication.
Yes.
And information flow. So that was really important for Stafford being, and he's misunderstood, unfortunately, because I think, people thought he was really looking at command and control, and he really wasn't.
No, yeah, it's all about designing freedom, as he put it.
Exactly, designing freedom.
Yeah, awesome. So before we dive into the core paper and the questions around that, I want to spend some time discussing about how we got to now, right? Let's talk about the status quo as it stands today. You already mentioned about how so many breach metrics and things like that are deteriorating. But at the same time, there's been tremendous improvements in certain areas as well. But nonetheless, we nothing to write home about as we stand today. And so how did we get here? What is fundamentally broken in mainstream cybersecurity? And I'm using that word kind of like a catch-all to mean information security, IT security, enterprise security, like anything to do with digital information and computers and protecting the data around that and identities and things like that. So I'm kind of using it as a catch-all. Like what's fundamentally broken?
I think what's fundamentally broken is that we don't understand what security really is and we're trying to persuade our developers and SOC analysts and all the different people that are involved in security to do better. He's going back to that Deming way of thinking, isn't it? When Deming said that by exalting people to do better, they will not do better. You've got to change the system so that the system enables them to do the right thing every time. We've had the same sort of problem with safety over the years. Safety had a huge problem. Lots of people getting injured in construction sites or in mines or wherever there's a dangerous task taking place, and we had to fix that. And there was originally a sort of compliance that came along and forcing people to do certain stuff. But one of the examples I was given really of where safety shows that if you don't fix the system, then the system is not going to set you up for success, or it can actually set you up for failure, was a story I heard about some technicians that were having to work up high on, I think there were silos or some sort of like machinery, or I can't remember really what it was, but they were working up high. And what they had to do is they had to work up high on one system, and then they had to move across to the next system and work on that one. And there was a gap. Now, the protocol said they had to come down the ladder, then they had to reattach all their harnesses and go up the other ladder to the top of the other one, or even reset up the ladder to go to the top of the other one. And of course, that took up a lot of time, and they was always under pressure to get the work done quicker. So what happened was these technicians decided that they were going to start bridging across the gap between these two systems. They didn't have the necessary tools to do that. They used ladders and ropes to try and build this like bridge across the top. And of course, eventually something went wrong, and someone, I think there was a fatality, and they died. And the problem you've got there is that the people say, well, of course he died. He didn't follow protocol. He should have come down the ladder and gone back up the other ladder. Yeah. Well, the system was faulty. The system wasn't enabling him. And I think we've got the same challenge in cybersecurity. We're expecting developers to write code securely, but we're not actually enabling them to do it. Maybe with AI, now AI is coming along, maybe we can start developing tools that are embedded in the IDE that can allow you to change the code as you're writing it to say, actually, there's a more secure way of writing that code, and this is how you do it. And then people can perhaps write more secure code that way. But But what we're doing at the moment is what Deming also warned us against doing is inspection. We're inspecting the code long after that code is written, and then expecting someone to go and fix it weeks or even months later to fix it. So rather than, unless they're like coming down the ladder, waiting, going up the ladder, so we're just bridging it and saying, well, actually, we're just going to get this bit of code out, and then we're going to get the next bit of code out, going to get the next bit of code out, and eventually you end up with a vulnerability being released as that is exploitable into production. And that's your incident, that's your fatality. You've released something into production that is dangerous, and that's your potential for a breach, let's say. What we need to do is start thinking about how do we fix that system? How do we fix the system and allow developers to write code securely in a way that doesn't interrupt their flow, that enables them to do stuff? So the solution that this company came up with in terms of these work and play was they built a platform, and the platform allowed allowed people to work and play, and then they was able to securely move the whole platform with everybody still on board to the next one and work up high, and then keep moving it across. And so there was no more coming down and up. They were bridging it in a secure and safe way with equipment that's been provided by the company and done properly. And so they was able to increase flow and improve safety at the same time. What we're doing in security is to try and improve, or software development. What we're trying to do is to improve security in a way that enables developers to be more secure without them having to go through down the ladder and up the ladder to try and do it. And I think that's the challenge. And DevSecOps was a way to try and overcome that. We introduced SAST tools, as I mentioned earlier, and software composition analysis and so forth. But ultimately, what happened was developers were running that way after they'd written the code, or it was in the pipeline during a later stage of the CI/CD pipeline, and it generated so many false positives that developers just said, what, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do here. So we weren't enabling developers to successfully write secure code, and I still think that's a challenge today. As I said, AI maybe potentially could be a solution to that. But of course, with AI, we're now going down another dangerous route, which is AI models are being they've been trained on data that is already insecure. They're looking at source code that's been written in an insecure way. They've been trained on that. So when they're, especially with live coding people, they're generating codes, or the old software developers, they're generating insecure code because that is what AI has been trained on. And so I've got around a bit there, but what I'm trying to say here is that we need a way to enable software development to be done in a secure way, rather than expecting developers to know how to write secure code. I think that's the challenge.
I think this is a good segue to dive into your book, DevSecOps.
Okay.
So can you say, obviously I want to get to the meat, which is really your paper and the VSM lens. But, this book was on the way as you were getting there. And so just give a little bit more context in terms of why did you write it, and what areas does it cover, so that, and of course we'll link it to the listeners as well.
Yeah, so I started writing the book right at the beginning of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And the reason for me writing it really is I didn't see anything that had been published about what DevSecOps really was. We'd heard of some of these security tools, but I didn't really see anywhere where there was a single place to go to see how all this fits together into software development. And I basically looked at it through 3 layers, basically. I said that there's a layer of learning and education. There's a layer of tooling and doing the SAST and so forth. And the whole idea of this is to try and, I use layers, it's a bit contrived really when I think about it, but what I was trying to show you here is that it's, rather than thinking about it, security is like being these different, like this SAST and this SCA and this, I was trying to say, well, actually, if you're going to do SAST, how can we develop systems and still learn from what we're doing? So, so tying the education piece into the whole idea of implementing tooling. So security automation, security education, so important. But we need to learn learn as an organization how to do things better as well, and how do we learn from them. The other thing as I also learned is that people didn't really know what SAST was, or DAST, or RAST, or SCA, or they didn't really understand what, how some of the platform security systems work. So from my experience and speaking with others as well, I thought I'd put something together. I also realized, speaking to people that worked in SOC, and in fact I interviewed one of them for the book, was that the people in SOC weren't seeing any improvements for DevSecOps. It's like saying you may be introducing all these like great security tooling into development, but when it comes to SOC and the products actually in live, we're still seeing the same number of incidents, the same problems, the same issues still coming up. So something's not working, and that's what got me thinking at the time. Maybe there is another way, and that's why I'm trying to write this book and trying to let people know that we need to cycle through this whole idea of security automation, security tooling, and security education, and work out that type of thinking rather than saying let's do SaaS, let's do SCA, let's do so yeah, that was the thinking behind my book. I mean, as I say, my orientation changes all the time. My orientation has changed slightly, and I think DevSecOps has changed as well, significantly over the last 2 years or so. So I'll be grateful if anybody does still read my book and provide some feedback on where you think improvements are. Even just take the book yourself and improve it yourself. I think that's important. But yeah, awesome. That's why I wrote a book, basically. Yeah.
Awesome. I think we have the stage set to dive into your paper. And so the first thing I want to talk about is, in your paper, you point out that organizations are drowning in vulnerabilities. And in some Silicon Valley companies, it's like millions and millions of vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And they're doing that because they rely on reductionistic approaches like simple vulnerability scoring and prioritization.
Yeah.
If so, why do you think that the cybersecurity industry as a whole has been so resistant to embracing systems thinking, to adopting holistic approaches to solve this?
I think the biggest challenge, as far as I can see, is that there isn't really anything that's driving that change. Compliance plays a major part of what we do. Mm-hmm. We said earlier that you have to do. I think even the EU Resilience Act says that you have to identify all vulnerabilities in your software. So that is driving software engineering companies, or to especially the ones that sell to European customers, which is arguably pretty much everybody. They have to identify the vulnerabilities in the code. And of course, the easiest way to do that is using something like SAST or DAST or IST, and so they run these tools, and they're not really thinking about what the outcome of that is. The outcome of that is that we are being drowned in all these vulnerabilities because we're just doing it to meet this regulatory requirement of identifying vulnerabilities. And because we are overwhelmed, we then do decide to put scores against them so we can prioritize them. But we've also discovered that, the highest ones aren't necessarily the most insecure ones. The ones with the highest score, the CVSS score, aren't necessarily the ones that are most going to give you the greatest risk. There's been research into chaining lower rated vulnerabilities and how they can exploit. And in fact, I was working with somebody many years ago who was inspired by something I told him. I said, we're running SAST, we've got all these highs, we're fixing the highs, but we're not fixing these lows. He went away and actually ran some penetration testing where he exploited 2 or 3 low rated vulnerabilities and was able
Yes.
to have a significant impact if he had carried it through. He didn't carry it through.
Yes. Yeah.
But that was the point. It really is. Like, how do we rank these? Why are we ranking them? That's a failure in the system. We don't need to rank these CVEs. We don't need to do that. We can't do that. We are growing exponentially in the number of CVEs that we're seeing, and it's got to the point that even the people that are managing the databases, the NVD, for example, National Vulnerability Database, their funding was stopped. And as a result, they weren't being updated. The NVD was not being updated. And so we're stuck in this system where we have so many vulnerabilities, we don't know how to fix them. And I think that's the reason why we are in this hole at the moment, is literally because we are being driven to do this by compliance, simplicity, easy just to run a scan. It's just put into your pipeline, run a scan, it's done. But the outcomes are where we are really not good at fixing we're not really good at managing the outcomes of those particular scans and the security tool that we're using.
Yeah. This is not the first time I've heard someone say compliance is getting in the way of security, like real security.
Well, compliance is getting in the way of
ironic.
safety. Yeah. Compliance is getting in the way of safety as well. Real safety. It's only when the compliance team started working very closely with safety professionals that they realised that actually there were better ways of doing it. And the safety industry's had a long time to try and sort itself out, and they're not there yet, obviously, by any stretch of imagination. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any fatalities at all, on construction sites and so forth. But they're doing a better job of it. In fact, the number of fatalities, the number of incidents, the number of serious injuries have been reducing steadily over many years, despite the amount of construction still increasing. We're not seeing that in software engineering yet. So, can we learn from safety as a try and see how we can do things better in our relationship between compliance and safety and security?
Yeah. I think, even with safety, there's this different worldviews of safety 1 versus safety 2.
Yeah.
And
where
one, you look at how you reducing the number of fatalities versus trying and understanding how actually things work to keep us safe in the first place, to see how work actually gets done on the Gemba. I think there's multiple intriguing side quests we can go there, but let me come back to the paper. So in the paper, you looked at VSM feasibility, and your interviewees rated VSM feasibility at 9 or even 10 out of 10 at local or divisional levels, but they kind of just dropped to 5 out of 10 across the whole organization. And so I'm kind of curious, why was that? What specific organizational forces or perspectives that created that gap, and can that gap itself be actually resolved with systems thinking?
Yes, it's a really good question. So what I found really was those that felt it could be done in the local area, it was really about span of control. They felt that, we could work on this within our team. We can improve communication between us and perhaps us and leadership. We can do that at the local level, but pushing it out to a wider group of people, it was considered, it was almost like too risky. It was too great a risk. If this doesn't work, we're going to be in serious trouble. So perhaps that psychology was something that came into this really. But from the actual study itself and some of the comments I had back, although I haven't got it in front of me right now, but I recall they were saying things like, we would not be allowed to do this at a larger scale. So it was, but it was interesting that, they could do it at a local level. And it was also very interesting that they totally understood the whole idea of if we can improve feedback, if we can improve communication, we could certainly change the way that we do things at the local level. That was quite nice. So the VSM, I don't know how much of your listeners will know about the VSM, but the VSM basically has 5 subsystems within it. So you have system 1, which is really your operations, your piece that's where the work's done, the teams are developing the work. Then you have system 2, which is like a communication channel and a communication tools between that and the management, the leadership. System 3 is like an inward and now looking type system. And this is, understanding how we're working within the actual organization in this case. So how, if you look at software engineering, and security, what is going on within the team and how we're doing it now. System 4 is like outwardly and looking to the future as like and trying to understand how things will change and adapt in the future. Now 3 or 4 create this homeostasis. So the idea is that if you know what's coming in the future, and I'm talking about immediate future, then you can adjust what's happening in the organization. And if you get that balance right, then in theory, you'll be a viable system. But how do we manage that through 4 homeostasis? It's through something called governance, and that's system 5. So the whole idea of this is you have this cohesive set of systems that are working very well together. It provides autonomy within those operations teams to do the work that they want to do. It has this like cohesion around how they do it, so that we're not having runaway teams or runaway groups doing stuff. It can be like you said earlier about chaos. And I guess it's what you were saying as well about like we want to try and find a middle ground, between strict governance where we're telling you what to do and total chaos where everything's running off and doing their own thing. And that's why the viable system model for me is a really interesting model, because it shows a way to allow autonomy, but also with that cohesive element around it. And I think that's what makes it interesting. And it's based on the idea that the brain, or the human brain or animal brain, has a similar sort of like function. So the brain isn't really sending out commands to do something. What the brain is doing is controlling us in the sense that it's sending is reacting to feedback loops from the environment around us, but it's also looking at us internally as well and seeing how our bodies are reacting. A good example of that would be, it's like, we humans, we have a body temperature that's pretty stable, about 37 degrees centigrade, 96 Fahrenheit. When I say Fahrenheit, I can't remember exactly what it is. But how do we maintain that? It's because we're not consciously doing this, we're doing this subconsciously, but our brains are saying when it gets too hot outside, it's telling our bodies to do something to cool us down. So we'll sweat. We might even think about taking items of clothing off to make us feel a bit cooler, or taking a cool shower. On the other hand, if it gets too cold from the environment telling us it's too cold, we can test our bodies, our body cooling down. Right, okay, we can start putting clothes on, we can warm ourselves up, we start shivering. And so that governance is more of a homeostatic control switch, as opposed to saying to my body, right, if it's getting too cold, you must warm up, or if it's getting too hot, you must cool down. It's not doing that. It's creating the environment within a system to react and triggering certain things that allow us to warm up and cool down. I mean, that's just one example. We've got other examples of like heart rates. Our heart rate goes up and down depending on how we're dealing with the environment around us as well. So if we're running, for example, it goes up. If we're lying sedentary, it comes back down. But it's something, if you're sitting in a chair watching or reading a book, and then suddenly there's a big bang outside the house, your heart rate's going to shoot up. So the environment has actually created, it's triggered something in your homeostasis that increases your heart rate, and that's getting you prepared for, say, fight or flight mode. And so that's sort of like where, we're not, the brain's not governing that through commands. It's just helping us manage that the whole dynamic system and keeping us cohesive. So the heart rate always stays around about the same. Our temperature rate stays very similar and so forth. And VSM was trying, or Stafford was trying to understand, maybe that not through those examples, but he was trying to understand how it is that our brains can maintain control of our system. And this is where Ross Ashby's really important as well. And this is another area with cybersecurity, I think, where we're struggling, is that it's the requisite variety. So, you know, so what I mean by that is that if you, to have a good model of the outside world, you need to actually have, I can't remember exactly how it worded, but the current Ashby law is around, you know, having enough requisite variety within the system to manage the different variety outside the system. There's two ways of managing that. One is to attenuate your understanding or your ability to attenuate the signals from outside,
the perturbations of the environment.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Yeah. Or you increase or the variety within us to actually amplify the variety to do that as well. So this again, I suppose, is where cybersecurity is struggling, because going back to vulnerability, we don't have the requisite variety to deal with all those vulnerabilities. We really are struggling. So we try to attenuate the number of vulnerabilities by sorting them and so forth, but that's not necessarily the right way of doing it. Or the other alternative is that we, you know, amplify the number of people that can develop, you know, that can fix those vulnerabilities, which means, you know, recruiting loads more software engineers to fix them. And again, that's prohibitive because of the cost. So it makes you no longer viable. So, you know, and that's something which I think we're struggling at, is managing that balance of the requisite variety within the system of security. And the way we're approaching it at the moment, I just don't think is working. Is, you know, the whole idea of like having millions of vulnerabilities and trying to fix them all or triage them at the very minimum is not the way forward.
Yeah. Have you kind of explored the idea of viability as in the viable system model itself? Like, how can a organism or a system stay viable in an environment that is uncertain and, you know, rapidly changing and shifting? So if there are, yes, there can be millions of vulnerabilities, but do they seriously challenge your viability? As in some cases, your attackers may actually want your site to be up and running and for you to be profitable and operational, so that they can take that 1% or 2% fraud losses to their pockets. In a way, there's a symbiotic relationship going on there. Like if they wipe you out, you know, they've killed their golden goose. Compliance is one lens that forces certain things. So it becomes a checkbox exercise, but then the real viability is determined by your level of your ability to take damage, like financial damage, and yet continue to service the remainder of the customers. Curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a very interesting area. That's what automatically triggers the word resilience in my mind.